Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention? Dave Clark is here and he's ready to do his presentation. So please, put your hands together, scream loudly, whistle, clap, and he is going to blow your minds away.
Well, thank you very much for that. I hope I'll live up to that. As you can hear, I've got a little bit of an accent here. And I still have a country which is part of another country. So thank you very much, Ollie. We're still close friends. Okay, so folks, first of all, just a big for coming along. It's great to see such a big turnout because, well, you know, over the last little while, we've been trying to get some more interesting things happening here, and we were lucky enough that we had Andy Gutman's come. He's the co-founder of Zend, and how many of you guys were actually here for that event? Well, I say here, but information. So quite a few folks were. That's great. What was really nice, just to give you a bit of backstory there, back around about 1993, a chap called Rasmus Lerdorf, he decided he was going to come along and make a dynamic, way of getting dynamic content into web pages, and that was PHP in its very early infancy. And then round about 1997, there was a couple of Israeli developers. There was Zev Saraski and also Andy Gutman's. Those guys, they started helping out, contributing along with the rest of the community, and they were really responsible for PHP pushing hard into the enterprise side and making it very much viable in that space. So, you know, there's quite often that time when I think and go, hey, you know what, I kind of have a job thanks to those guys really pushing hard along with the community to make it actually happen. So, so one of the key messages that Andy was talking about at the time was really the need to focus on application development now with an API first mentality. So how many people are actually currently building APIs? Yeah, so a few people, okay, cool. And how many people would want to learn how to do it and for a lot of the pain to be taken away? The pain to be taken away, nice little caveat there. Everybody with their hands right up. So pretty much what I wanted to talk about was the subject of Apigility, which is a project that was put together by the team behind Zend Framework. And just to give you a bit of background, again there, as I say, 1997 was when Andy and Zev got started and really pushing hard in the PHP community. And then round about 2007, there was a PHP framework. For anybody who's not familiar with what frameworks are, they're really just libraries of components that are pretty much pre-rolled. So that rather than you going on trying to reinvent the wheel all the time, then you're in a situation where you can just take these pieces of kit and then start putting them together. You can worry much more then about getting from A to B than, you know, the whole concern of rating the engine and everything else like that. So the Zend framework, that's a very popular commercial framework, mainly made popular early on because unlike the licensing, like the GPL license, you were in a situation where you could actually reuse the code from the framework without any sort of tie into having to give back what you do to the community. Now, in some ways, you might look at that and go, well, that's a kind of a shame, but at the same time, you've got to think about it from the commercial perspective as well and go, well, look, here's a way of actually collaborating to build these great things in the spirit of reuse and then go forward and have something that's really commercially viable at the end of the day. And so, yeah, lots of people were using Zend Framework. And then round about 2012, round about September, that's when Zend Framework 2 was released. And since then, there's been a lot of focus on this idea of API first when you build your applications, thinking about trying to really separate out the concerns in your applications. So, you know, separating, I think probably the easiest way is actually take a step back and think about how app development has been done previously. You're in a situation where you had business logic and presentation logic all mixed in together. And from a maintenance perspective, that was pretty hard going, right? It could be quite difficult to build new features because you'd be thinking about all this intermingled code. It'd be hard for designers to concentrate on what they do very well. So the idea of separating out concerns is not a new thing, right? It definitely makes things easier when you come to develop complex applications. But the idea of API first is really just thinking about having very easy to access endpoints where you can exchange data, so you pass some information in, even if it's just something like triggering a process, or you're trying to update some customer record somewhere. The idea is that you push that information to an endpoint, and then you get a response back to let you know, hey, was everything good? Yeah, everything was good. Or, hey, no, there's a real problem, and we need to do something about it. So I was quite lucky that there was a conference just recently a little bit closer to home. It was over in New Zealand, and I was invited to go along with some other speakers to talk, and I was talking on the subject of Apigility. So what I'm going to do for you is give you not exactly the same presentation as what I gave there, but I'll use the slides that I used, and I'll also use the demo project just for a little bit of simplicity, because there's no point, again, reinventing the wheel. Just trying to get the concept across, show you what you can do, and also then give you the instructions. So if you wanted to, you can start dabbling as well, so kind of reduces some of the effort in getting going. Not that there's actually much effort, to be fair, it's pretty easy. So I'll just get logged in. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that the mic can cut out at times here, so if it does, then I'll try and cater for that and go back over what I've been saying. But if you can't hear something, feel free to shout out and let me know. If I'm also talking too quickly, it's probably something to do with the amount of coffee I've had today, but feel free to tell me to slow down as well, because my accent can get a little bit out of control when I'm excited. So here we are. How many people have used Postman before? So a few people, okay. For those people who haven't, just to give you an idea of what it is, it's a very simple tool, it's a free tool, and you can use that tool to test API endpoints. Now, quite a lot of modern IDEs have some way of you being able to test API endpoints anyway built in, but Postman is quite a nice easy one to get in and start using, and on the basis that it is free and most people should find it easy to get hold of Chrome, then what I've done with this particular series of little endpoint calls that I've got packaged up here, I've made it so that the repository on Bitbucket where this stuff's stored, it has the Postman collection that you can then import. So to give you an idea, I spun up this virtual machine for the first time today, and what I did was I went to the repository, so I'll just show you where that is right now so you know where to go. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that it's on the meetup site as well, so you know how to navigate to it. And if you're looking to get to it, go to bitbucket.org /DKCWD, and when you get on in there, what you'll see is there's a repository which is not so creatively titled PHP NZ14 Apigility demo code. So there you go, quite specific. Find that there, and shouldn't have any problems getting hold of it. So a couple of things in the README. If you do attempt to work with this project and you find that the README is too light, there's not enough information to help you get up and running, let me know and I'll adjust it. From that point of view, I just want it to be kind of helpful for people who want to dabble and have a play, really. So with the source code that's in here, what you'll see is there's a folder called Apigility. This is where the project actually, there you go. This is where the project. Is there another mic there? So,
might have used up the limit, your word limit.
I used up my word limit. It's rate limiting on my API. So
You should get small batteries.
I've heard that before.
Alrighty. In the meantime, we'll muddle through. It could also just be that it's signal not strong enough. So anyway, in the repo here, you can see a folder called Apigility. You'll see something apigility demo.json.postman_collection. There's a README, and then there's the slides just as a PDF from that presentation. So rapid API development with Apigility, and then some SQL, which you can run in your favorite whatever you want to import your SQL with type application, or even on the command line. So the gist of it is, those things are there. The actual project lives in Apigility. So if you want to introspect the code, then that's where you'll be going. And tonight, with the way I've got it set up, we'll be able to look at that inside of PHP Storm and go from there. So, probably useful to give you a little bit of background then about the Apigility project. So, when it first started kind of off the back of another project, which was Zen Server Gateway. And for anybody who's ever used Zen Server, like you may have, you may not have, it is a product that's offered by Zen, so Zen being the PHP company for anyone who's just arrived there. The situation with it was that it provided you with a nice easy way to set up endpoints. You had a graphical interface which was available inside of Zen Studio, which is another Zen product. But then what they've done is they've evolved it into this project now. What you see with Apigility is essentially a UI which is built inside built using AngularJS, and then the code that's in the back end that's making all of the great stuff happen, it's all PHP code. It's mainly based on Zen Framework 2, but the idea, as far as I understand it, is the long-term goal is to try and make it much more agnostic. And so it's going to be, all those dependencies we have with Zen Framework 2, most of those I think are going to end up being moved out, so it's a much more flexible arrangement. Did anybody happen to see the chat that was going on in the Twitter feed for Sydphp with Dan Aykroyd? Not Dan Aykroyd, the actor, but Dan Aykroyd, who we know and love from the Sydphp group, who really needs to get back to Australia sometime soon. But he was talking about the idea of dependency injection done right. And for anybody who's not familiar with the idea of dependency injection or why it's a useful thing, the example I usually use, forgive me for anybody who's heard this a million times, but the example I usually give is the idea that you wouldn't go out into somewhere like JB Hi-Fi and go and buy a CD player that only ever had the Beatles on it. Some people might, but just one CD stuck in there, right? You wouldn't do that. What would be the point, right? The idea is that you want to be able to buy the CD player and then switch out one of those CDs for another CD, right? You want to listen to something else. So the idea behind dependency injection is very similar in that regard. So you've got a component which does logging, because everybody does logging, and then you want to switch out for some other implementation of that logger. So the idea of dependency injection is that you are then able to actually use the relevant component you want in a way that's very easy to switch out as a developer. So in just a minute or two, I think we're going to get sorted out with some new batteries, which would be great. Actually, it's going quite well just now. Sure, thanks for your help. That's great. The main thing with it is that it's a strategy you can use in order to make your code base that bit more flexible and have the opportunity to use different implementations quite easily. So you can certainly find out more about it, but one of the things that Dan was actually raising on the Twitter feed was, hey, look, what's the point in even having a framework these days? Shouldn't you just have some really simple components that you can then use to do those parts that you're actually using your framework for, like the idea of dependency injection, like the idea of being able to instantiate a relevant instance that you want and configure it exactly the way you want. And I think I see Nick Butenko at the back. Good to see you there, sir. Well, it's been far too long. See you. So yeah, from that point of view, the things that are inside of Apigility right now, there's a very good chance that as the project evolves, they'll start to move much more towards that kind of framework agnostic approach. We'll need to see what happens, and one of the key things is nothing's going to happen if nobody gets involved. That's not entirely true, because I think Matthew Wiro-Finney, the guy who's the project lead for this, who's been the project lead for Zen Framework 1 and Zen Framework 2, then moving on to doing Apigility, he's really done a lot of good work there as far as setting up all these really great conventions. And I think he's got that passion where he's likely to be there for the long haul. But if it's a project that you start using and you think to yourself, hey, this could actually be something really good, it's taking that essence, that feeling, that passion, and then turning it into actual contribution and taking the project where it should go. Even if it's just commentary and saying, look, you know what, this is the way I'm using this, and I think that we should do this. You know how it all starts with ideas. They end up gathering momentum. Just take somebody or a group of people to actually do something about it, and then suddenly you've got this. It's like these meetups. People can say, yeah, it's a great idea to have a meetup, but it's only because you guys are wanting to come along, and there's people who are making it happen that it happens. So there's an idea, turn it into action. The idea is that if you really like a project and you're doing a lot with it, you're probably in a good position to add value to that project with your own thoughts, as well as your own contributions. anyway, that aside, you're probably wondering what Apigility is actually all about, so it's worthwhile me getting in here and showing you a little bit with it. Now, first of all, before I do this, how many people are working every day with at least version 5.4 of PHP? Okay, so still a few people who are not. How many are using above that version? So some. How many people are mainly using below? 5.3 maybe, still? So obviously 5.3 from that point of view, just in case you didn't know, it's definitely end of life now, so no more security updates. The only people who are going to be doing security updates are Zen themselves, and that will be for clients who are actually locked into more of a service agreement with them, so they'll continue to do some ongoing support for that. But yeah, if you were trying to follow along with what's actually in the README, you'll see that I'm actually using PHP's own local web development server. That's something that was a feature introduced with PHP 5.4. So the idea is you don't need to go ahead and set up Apache or anything like that to start using this, and I'll show you how I'll kick it off right now. So, first of all, off to my handy terminal here. I'm just going to cancel this request so you can see it in action here. So the command that I ran was php-S, which you can't see off that side of the screen, then localhost port 8888, and you can choose an alternative port, that's just the one I chose, and then -t public, and public /index.php. That's in the README, so you don't need to remember that, there's no test on it later, so feel free to just copy and paste it like I did. But the gist of it here is that if I kick this off, I'm actually running this local server now, and it means that my Apigility project, I could go in the browser now to localhost 8888, and then I'll be able to access that. So let's put that to the test. Enough of the chat, let's get down to this here. So first of all, localhost. And what we want to do is, is go to 8888. Now let's jump on to that. I'm sure I probably don't need to do that, but I'll do it anyway, just because it's live demo time. You never want things to go wrong at live demo time. There we go. See? You never want things to go wrong at live demo time. Who said that? You don't want things to go wrong at live demo time. So, from that point of view, lots of explosions in the sky, and very, very good fun things happening. And I'm sure that I shall be able to see something happening here. Maybe not. So don't work with children and animals or arcade Shiba laptops. What was that? Or PHPs. Yeah, never work with PHP. I was joking. Alrighty. So, get off the stage. I heard somebody say that. Now, from that point of view, I've just restarted that guy again, so let's give it a go. No. Not working. Tell you what I'll do actually, it might be that I'm actually still dependent somehow on having an internet connection, and that's probably part of the parcel. When I last did this, I had it open, so that might be a hidden dependency I'll need to mark there in my README, which kind of sucks a bit for a local web server. Let's try that, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, that'd be great. Is it the usual password? Cool. That's not actually the password, by the way. It's the usual password. Which would be handy if it was. Anyway. So, I was just saying actually on the way over here, we had an interesting cab ride where we ended up going an alternative route. And when I say an alternative route, I mean we went completely to the wrong place. So that kind of sucked. But I always like to think about life like software development. Okay, so the idea of handle errors gracefully, we'll all have a better experience. At least that's the idea anyway. So let's see if this is now doing the job for us. No, still exploding with flames. Well, in that case then, I won't labour the point, and I'll see if I can get this up and running a little bit later on for you, won't hold you back. But the gist of it is that you've got a very simple to use front end, which then allows you to just step by step enter relevant values into a form, and there's a whole stack of code generation code that's actually inside of the underlying framework that's running Apigility, and it'll go ahead and it'll create config files for you. It'll go ahead and it'll create relevant controllers for you and things like that. The main concept behind it is to provide you with the likes a very simple way of handling RESTful resources and also RPC routes. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that, I'll explain that in just a moment for you, and then before this evening is over, I'll show you exactly how it looks, so we'll go from there. So first off, I'm just going to open up inside of PHP Storm, the Apigility project, see what's in there already, and it'll give you a bit of context for what's been generated for us. This was an example of just a very simple application I was wanting to put together to show off the idea of creating a RESTful route. So when this loads up the project, I'll just take you on a very quick whistle-stop tour of the code base. For those of you guys who are building APIs at the moment and who have been, what are the main pain points for you? Any suggestions on what are really painful things to do with APIs? Hey, Rob.
You repeat yourself 4 times, you define the server implementation, you define the validation, and then you define the client in multiple languages, you define the documentation, and it's terrible. I've never found a solution for it all. Please help me.
Oh, it's painful, you know what? And absolutely, it tends to address most of those things. I say most because it doesn't address absolutely all of them. And that's the key thing, you're still going to have to end up doing some work. But what it's doing actually, and just to address some of those things directly, this allows you actually via the interface to define the documentation in one place and also to develop the code in one place as well. So it's very nice simple UI, which I'd love to show you right now. I would love to show you right now, but it'll probably be a little bit later on. The thing that's important to bear in mind as well is that as much as I'm telling you about it and spreading the word about it, there are also some great videos on the Apigility site as well, so you can get walkthroughs of things like the documentation and things like that. It works with Swagger as well. I don't know if some of you guys are familiar with Swagger, like for documenting APIs and stuff. So yeah, so there's a way of being able to do that pretty easily from the Apigility UI. So just coming back for a moment to things like defining things over and over again, the idea is that you can very quickly, via this interface, say you're going to create an API. So you create your API, and then you can define a number of different services with that API. You can say that you want RESTful resources, or you want to have RPC routes. For anybody, actually I should have just asked again, I know I ask a lot of questions, but how many people are already very comfortable with the idea of what a RESTful service would be as far as APIs are concerned? Yeah, so quite a few people, some people who are not. RPC, remote procedure call? Yeah? Okay, so less. For me, what I'm seeing right now, just in terms of, I suppose, thinking about the commercial opportunity for helping people where they have legacy systems, where there's very, very tightly coupled code. I quite often see those situations where, as I say, the business logic is mixed in with the presentation layer, and it can be quite unwieldy to add new features. It's very often not a very good idea to say, let's just rebuild the entire thing, depending on the size of the system. You could be talking about something that's 8 years old. It may make more sense to say, what's the highest business value here? Is it your quoting service? Okay, you've got a quoting service here, so let's actually take that component, make it an API endpoint that we can send data to and get a response from, and then gradually replace the parts of the system that use the logic to where it's all intermingled. They can then just have very simple calls out to the API, pass the information needs to be passed from it via form, and then get the data back. So I'm seeing a lot of opportunities to say, let's build an API application which will end up being the guy that sits just before all your databases, etc. And then you can expose these services. Everything talks to the API. You gradually replace one feature at a time in an iterative way. So maybe saying, let's do this over the next 2 weeks, replace the quoting service, and then that will really promote reuse. So thinking about likes of like when you've got people who have very, very specialist niche businesses, they have a lot of really good knowledge about that particular area, and they very likely actually have some very complicated business rules that have been tried and tested and have stood the test of time to be around for, what, 8-9 years as a piece of software that's out there. So taking something like that and then turning it into an API service in itself presents those people with another commercial opportunity, because you can then say, okay, well, let's repackage this up just as a service and then make it available to others. So if that doesn't really make too much sense, it probably will, after hearing more people talk about this sort of thing as well. But the gist of it with Apigility is that it just makes it much faster to do those initial proof of concept endpoints and then build on that iteratively and then expose reusable services. So let's jump on in here, closing out with the tip of the day, which I very rarely read, but probably should, given my activity here. So we'll go to the module folder here. Just so you see here, you can see this folder structure. This is fairly similar to most Zen Framework 2 applications where people are trying to build it in a sort of MVC-like way. But looking at it here, there's a module folder. You'll see one here which says property app. And what happened was that I said I wanted to create a property app API. So the idea is that this folder here, this property app folder, will be my property app API. I was thinking that it could be evolved into something where people can list their properties for rent, that sort of thing, just as an example to try and get people thinking about it. And if we go into source here, you'll see property app again, and then v1. One of the big things that people usually complain about with building APIs is versioning them. You know, the fact that it can be fairly complex in certain cases to version an API, depending on what you're doing. Apigility actually does make that a lot easier. The idea being that you can very quickly bump the version of the API using the UI. And of course, you're hearing all about this UI, not actually seeing it. So, I guess working with me on the old sort of live demo joy, then you probably will want to have a look at that. There is a specific video about that too. But it is very, very easy to do. And what would happen is that everything you currently have in your version, when you create a new version, it would essentially have a script that runs through, takes everything you've got, already as version 1 in this case, and it would create a version 2 with everything at that point in time as it was. So it then becomes very easy to start developing the next feature. And if you wanted to expose a particular version of the API, let's imagine that you have been very successful building an API that lots of people are using, and you want to be able to keep a certain group of customers happy by continuing to serve up a particular API version because they're maybe not able to adapt as quickly to start utilizing the newest one, then you could reliably continue to serve up version 1, and then, each new version from there. People who are new coming onto it can take the newer version, and you'll be very easily able to use those different versions. So in this case, this particular API that I was building, I wanted to start with a RESTful API. So just to explain the idea of REST without going too deep, because web services in themselves they can be quite a complex area to get across all the little things about them, because there are plenty. But put very simply, REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and the idea behind it is that it's very much along the lines of how the web's meant to work, the idea that there are resources that you can get to with an identifier, so in this case a URI or URL, the idea being that you can put this into your browser with a RESTful web service and then be able to work with it. Common examples would be thinking about maybe like a customer API. If we were working with a customer API and it was a RESTful service, the sort of characteristics we'd expect with a URL would be that it wouldn't contain any verbs. With an RPC service, we might have things like, customers and then get customer as a parameter or something like that, telling it we were going to go off and get a customer. The way it would work with a RESTful service is that we would have customer in the URL, and that would be the resource that we were asking about. If we sent an HTTP request and the HTTP method was GET, then what we'd be saying is at that point in time, without any additional parameters, let's assume it's ourdomain.com/customers. If we sent a GET request to that, we'd be asking for all of the customers. Now, in our actual implementation, we might decide to only return 10 or 20 of those in a paginated result set and allow someone the ability to go through and get more depending on what they're doing. But regardless, the idea is that you can go off, hit that URL, and then get all of the customers. If you were then to say customers post and the post request, sorry, I should not do that with my hand because that makes you think there's a URL there. Let's just say it was customer, again the same URL you went to, all you're changing is the HTTP method. So you go with post, and what you would do is have a payload of data that you send through as a post request, and the idea would be that in a service like that, you would end up getting a notification back to say, yep, all is good, and it would be via the HTTP status code in the response. So if you're creating something, you'd expect it to map back to the status code 201, which is to say that something was created. So quite a different way of working from your typical sort of RPC service, oh, I'm going to go off and get all my customers, I've got all my customers, and it just being a get or a post that you're sending. HTTP methods are what drives this whole idea of what you're actually trying to do. It's explaining your intent. I either want to get something, or I want to create something, or I want to update something. So all of the CRUD functionality you would expect with any sort of enterprise application or otherwise, you want to be able to create something, read something, update something, delete something. All of those are there in the HTTP methods, and it's then down to you as a developer when you're developing this kind of service to provide a consistent API for people to work with and enjoy. One of the hardest things I think that people had early on with trying to build APIs was maybe not even being sure as to what they should do, not really knowing what was a good convention or what isn't. One of the nice things about Apigility is that from the get-go, if you wanted to, just even do a bit of experimentation to learn more about the likes of RESTful services, you could actually expose directly database tables as a RESTful resource, and then use a tool like Postman to actually post some data directly into the relevant table, right? It's actually quite straightforward to get up and running that way. So what I would say is if you are taking notes, and I recommend that if you are interested you do, then what to look up would be the DB connected resource. Okay, so if you look up what a DB connected resource is, you'd find it very easy to actually build that through the UI. The idea would be you define your adapter parameters. So if you're using a MySQL database, you can go ahead and say, okay, well here's my credentials here for that. And then you can use that adapter and say, I'm going to go off and talk to this database table and expose it that way. So it's very, very easy to get up and running doing that. In this case here, I decided I wanted a little bit more control. I liked what Matthew Weir-Finney was doing with some of his examples, but what I wanted to do was try and get across a bit more how I would probably build something from scratch. I would definitely do more than this, but it's just giving you a bit of an idea about what sort of components would be involved. Because what I'm quite keen to do as well is promote the idea of understanding more the idea of separation of concern with components. So what I've got here inside of property, if you were just to ping this open, you'll see quite a few different things, right? Now, as I scroll on down here and get rid of this little message that I've got, you'll see these files here. These are the ones that I wanted to just very briefly talk about. So what you'll see here is I've got one for collection. Now this would be when I send off a request saying, I want all of the properties. Then this is the guy that's going to be involved. We've got entity, that's what's going to represent an individual property. I've then got a mapper. Now, if anybody is not familiar with what a mapper is, think of it as a component that's there to help you map from from an entity, as it were, an object, back to a relevant data store, right? Now, that data store could be anything. It could be another web service for all we care, right? But the idea is the mapper, it's not a direct sort of, oh, I'm a database, right? It's a much more abstract idea. So it's just being able to exchange information between an object and a data store. And the thing is, you might notice a bit of a tendency with these files for a little word there to be attached to the back of them, which is factory, right? And there's the old jokes about having a factory, and when does it stop? This idea of being able to configure your instances, right? And in this particular case, I am taking the approach that what I'd like to do is maintain the ability to control how my services and these different components are actually configured. So I use a factory to bring in anything to play that's a little bit more complex and would require some configuration. So in this case, I've got a mapper factory which is, in this case, actually I'm using a database. I've got a table gateway and a table gateway factory, again, being able to provide alternative ways of getting in there. But probably the most important things here, folks, is to focus on the fact that we've got collection, entity, and then resource, right? All these other things end up, coming into it when we're trying to actually store something somewhere or get something back from somewhere. But the most important things to think about are the collection, the entity, and the resource, right? So I'll jump on in and get hold of the resource here. And hopefully you'll be able to read that. If not, then don't worry about it, and just let me know, and I'll see if I can adjust the size of the text. But as you can see, quite typical sort of modern code. We're taking advantage of namespaces which have been available since 5.3. And we've got this class here, this resource class, which extends an abstract resource listener. Now the thing about this resource class here, the way it works is it's got different methods which are set up inside of here to handle the different scenarios like the create, the read, the update, the delete, right? And there's the idea not just of being able to delete one thing, but being able to delete multiple things. There's the idea of not just being able to update one thing, but a list of things, right? So they've got methods in there to cater for that. And what you'll notice is where I haven't implemented a method, by default, Apigility has created for me the relevant resource class with the different methods. And all it's doing, when I haven't implemented one of them, by default, it returns a new API problem, it provides a relevant status code, and then the message to say that it actually hasn't been defined for individual resources, etc., and hasn't been defined for collections down here with the delete list. So to explain a little bit, one of the big problems with designing an API and making good use of it is to be able to have a consistent approach for error handling and things like that. So what Matthew Ruffini spent a lot of time thinking about was trying to define a good reusable standard for that, and ended up coming up with this idea of the API problem. So essentially you've got the ability to put the status code in as a parameter and a message that would be quite helpful. And the thing about this, if I can actually just check this, I should see if I'm actually able to run the Postman one here, see if that's working for us. Ideally it will be, and if it's not, then we'll have a chat about that. There we go, actually it does seem to be working. Okay, let's have a look and see the data that's there. Yep, it's there. Okay, right, so folks, just to explain a little bit, inside of Postman, it's very easy to set up requests, and you can store those requests in your own collection of requests, and that's particularly useful for when you want to test something, right? So what I've done is I've just set up a few ones here saying, we've got a get request, which is going to request all the properties using the correct accept header, and then we've got one which is going to be using an incorrect UUID format. Just to explain a little bit for anybody who's not aware of what a UUID is, it's a universally unique identifier, and it's something that looks a little bit like this. Can look a little bit different in other circumstances, but it's kind of it's moving away from that idea of just having a sort of standard auto-incrementing ID in a database. It's something that uniquely identifies that regardless of the server it's on or whatever. So that's what's going on there with that. So I've got a particular UUID format in my API. I'm saying ID. Behind the scenes, I'm using a UUID to prepare that. But the long story cut short is, if we scroll on down that a little bit, you'll see a little bit more about the response we're actually getting back from the server. First of all, you can see some links here with this sort of funky formatting here with the underscore before it. Something to understand about this particular response format is it's something that's not really being used I actually can't think of any APIs right now that are using it extensively, but it's very likely will end up changing over time. Whether it ends up being HAL or not, we'll see. But the HAL specification is really, think of it as being a way for the machine to very quickly read their, where are we in this? If we imagine that we were returning a whole stack of resources, maybe we've got a database that's got 5,000, 10,000, however many records, we've sent off a request to get those back. We've got a way of being very quickly able to tell where we are in that large group of records and being able to go from one to the other via the URL. We've also got the actual item that's embedded here, this property item, this property entity, but represented in the JSON response. So looking at it there, you can see it's got an ID, it's got a formatted property address, it's got a property type, it's got a latitude and longitude, just some stuff that we'd stored in the database, and you can see some additional links here about it. So you could take this HAL specification, and what you could do is work within it, and if you chose to adopt it, well, you've got a convention that's already there for you. You could choose to just come up with your own way of representing these structures. That would be fine to do, and lots of people would be quite happy doing that as well. But just to say that if you were starting out with it, then you would have an option to adopt that and then start working with it. So if we look a little bit further down, you can see there are a few different properties here, right? So this is the response that we've got back. It's telling us the page count, the page size that we've specified. Again, that's configurable, of course, and the total number of items that we've actually returned. So lots of very useful information in one response there that's been built up using the tools that we have inside of Apigility. So we didn't have to do anything other than say that we wanted that to be the response type. So from there, let's say that we wanted to go off and request this this resource here, but we've got a UUID format that's not quite right, because we've got a validator that validates the UUID, and this doesn't look like that format. So I'm going to go off and send this request and see what happens, and all going well, then we'll get a nice little API problem response. So in this case here, everything's mapped back to the relevant status codes, and we haven't had to really think too hard. We've just been able to go off, try and request it, and it said, hey, I can't get this guy. And it gives us the very specific message. The unique identifier is not a valid UUID format, and that was something that I had built into that resource call, validating whether or not this guy is actually of the appropriate format. So if you want to create something, then you could do it along these lines. So again, Postman, I've got the URL here just so you can see the example of the type of URL I was talking about. So you can see localhost port 8888, and then property, I've got a post request, and what I've done is I've just packaged up a neat little JSON object here. So I'm just saying, okay, formatted property address is blah, here's the property type, the lat and the long, and then I'm going to go off and submit this, and what we should see is a nice handy response coming back and telling us, no problem, we've created that for you because we really like the cut of your jibs there, and you've got an awesome Scottish accent. There we go. So here we are. And you can see this is the response for us. We can see that the response code is 201, and we can see through Postman as well what that actually is what it actually means. If you weren't familiar, it can actually be quite a useful learning tool as well, right? So 201 created, resource has been fulfilled, request being fulfilled, resulted in a new resource being created. So all good from there. This guy now exists, and if we were to go back to requesting all of our properties, then we should see pretty shortly by scrolling on down to the bottom that we've got a whole stack. Well, we've got one more, okay. Yeah, created one, so go on. Awesome. Right, from there, if we wanted to update an existing one, let's just say that we go off and request a very specific item. So I've got one here with a valid UUID, here it is, and we can see that the current address here, the formatted property address, is 26 for Bow Street, just up the road from Road Formation there. Let's go on ahead here and say that, yeah, we want to go ahead and update this. So what we've got is we've got an example of put, and by coming on in here, I can adjust the payload very quickly and easily. Bearing in mind, folks, you wouldn't be doing this, but you could do this via testing. Let's just think about this for a second. Instead of waiting for somebody to go ahead and actually build the front end, you can already test the API and make sure it's doing what it's meant to do. And that, in terms of time saving, scalable savings of time, knowing that everything works the way it's meant to, is really, really valuable. So make sure the API works before you start working with it, and that then, ideally the front end should be able to just hit that. And even better, you know what it should look like when things work. So why don't you just give somebody a mock? They can hit an endpoint and get a mock of what the data should look like, and then they can continue to work without you. The API doesn't even need to be on, they've just got examples of what this stuff should look like. Anyway, so the gist of it here is if we want to make a change to this, I'll just say 21, even though it's the wrong long and lat, don't care, the idea is just about demoing that there. And in this case here, we just got a 200 by saying, that it's been successful. And if you look down at the response, we actually get the updated resource back, so we can start working with it. There's kind of approach, in some respects, might seem quite heavy. Some people might be looking at this and going, hey, you know what, if I'm working with an API, I've got to think about bandwidth, I've got to think about data usage, I've got to think about how heavy these requests are and what we're actually doing with it. And in this case here, that may be too much information for some people. So the thing to bear in mind is here, we're not saying that you have to do it. Apigility is a very opinionated project and it's giving you some conventions you can work within, but there's absolutely nothing to stop you. We're all developers, we can develop, right? You can do something different if you want. You can make it much smaller. So that's giving you a bit of an idea about the sorts of things that you can do. I've got an example of patch in there, but it's exactly the same as put in my case. In my implementation, the only difference between the patch and the... Actually, in fact, you know, with the put, just to explain, put is what you would use to update, and patch is what you would use to do a partial update. In the actual code implementation, what I've done is I've gone ahead and used the code for doing a partial update for put as well. So maybe that's a little bit lazy to some people, but for me I think it makes good sense because it just means that, you know, whether you use put or patch, you're able to go ahead and do that. There could be some good reason not to. I couldn't think of one at the time and thought let's keep it simple. So going forward from there, really without being able to demonstrate the front end to you, it's just hopefully just giving you a bit of a flavour. More than happy to talk with anyone about this, and if anybody wants to have a look at the code, well, you know, you've got the option of either doing it yourself or having a bit of a play with what's here, even just as a reference project. It's not a complete project. I may do some more enhancement to it, whatever, but it would be very much based on interest. If someone wants me to do that, let me know, and I'll get in there and do it by all means. And if you're looking at it and it doesn't make sense, let me know. Again, by all means, I'll get in there and have a look at it. Any questions other than the bingo? Obviously, over there, there might be some awesome prizes. But any questions? Sure.
One for either you or anyone who's implemented a large API. If you had, say, several hundred different types of entities that are all permutations and slightly different, how would you go? Is there a pattern to structure it? Like, would you have /super category / product, or does that break?
So talk about hierarchical resources and how you'd represent them. Are you talking specifically about how you would reference those or represent them in a RESTful
Yeah, I
way?
just wondered if there was a particular pattern to sort of start to cover once you start getting very large amounts of different entities.
I think most of these things end up being driven by what the business needs. You know, most of the time it'll be for a commercial reason that someone will go to that level of developing an API to that extent. So my own thoughts would be, what are you going to get most value from? Think about how you structure it from that perspective. So you might not want to go off and just create lots of relationships. There would have to be, you know, some reason, some value behind representing the data in a certain way for people to use it and update it, etc. So that from my point of view, it would come back to highest business value first. Let's look at what the relationships should be and how it should be represented for someone to work with it, and then be able to manipulate it. Anybody get any other thoughts on that? Particularly any sort of patterns? Ollie?
Sorry, on that, do they recommend singular or plural?
Oh, do you mean like in naming conventions? I actually don't know. I don't know what's being mentioned, but most of the time I think with the guys in guys developing stuff for Zen framework, it's usually favouring singular. You know, like so customer is the API rather than customers. You know what I mean? So customer. Sorry.
If it's a noun,
Yeah.
then you know it's a resource. So
Yeah.
it could be a noun, a collection of things. It's a noun. It's a verb. You know you're going the wrong path. So
Yeah.
it's a verb, it's an action. It's a noun. So it could be a list customers. And you can actually have a JSON list or an XML output. Or you can one attribute still a noun. But the minute that you actually have anything that smells like an action, you know that you've got the wrong one.
Absolutely.
Guys from APG who work on API, they usually say it's better to use plural, but it's up to the company itself. You just need to use it same everywhere.
That's the thing, is consistency is the
You
key.
just
Yeah.
need to stick with something.
Yeah.
But usually plural is slightly better when you want to get stuff.
Apigility has a really good document. You can download
Okay.
from their website, high level, that takes you through what you should do, best use cases, and it talks through like why Facebook did this, why LinkedIn did this, why this works, and what sucks about it.
What I think would be quite nice actually with the meetup, tonight with the comments and stuff. It'd be really good to put some of these things in, like resources that you've come across you think is really good. You know, things you've come across and you thought this is either a really great example of an API done well, or you know, a poor example. Always helpful to provide just that little bit more information why you think it's not a good implementation, or you know, if you're looking for somebody to give advice, it might be a useful thing to do as well. But generally, the comments in the meetup might be quite good to get some of those going. Certainly, that sounds like a good document to reference. There's also, I think, the Heroku API document as well, which is good. Was that the one you're thinking of as well, Rob? See you nodding as well. It's pretty good. Yeah. I think it's easy when you look at a document like that to say, well, what wouldn't we implement out of that, rather than thinking, yeah, what were we going to? All right, so I'm conscious of it. What were you going to say?
Oh, sorry, no. Just how would you recommend testing this? Is there a mock, like Ruby has rat, Python has whiskey? Is there how do you plug this in? How would you recommend testing it?
You know, I know this is going to end up sounding like a bit of a Postman plug, but if you haven't seen the...
In an automated fashion,
yeah, you can actually do it via Postman. There's actually, this is the paid part of it out of Postman. You can actually do things like environment variables, you can do setups for command line running it, things like that. So there's actually some quite interesting things you can do.
Apparently Bhat is actually, although Bhat's usually for the interface and stuff, is being used for testing APIs like this. We actually use it at our company, just setting up Bhat to say, right, get the endpoints and checking what's actually there.
Yeah.
And we automate that in our continuous integration environment.
There's a really good book by Phil Sturgeon called Building APIs You Won't Hate, and it takes you through a similar process of actually writing your Bhat tests first, and then going in and defining your endpoints, and you know, obviously testing them manually through Postman is quite useful, but purely from an API design level, ignoring your implementation, that's how they test their endpoints. Strongly recommended. It's only $20 a book. It's a good download.
I'm sure if you hang out with Phil, we might get it cheaper.
Buy him a cider.
Buy him a cider. I think he'll give you
cider and whiskey.
He'll give you the copy under his bed. That's it. So, alrighty.
Are there any, like if the idea is to rapidly generate APIs you can use straight away, is there any client-side equivalent?
So any client-side equivalent?
Like it's following a script convention, it's auto-generating a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Is it going to go off and generate JavaScript client-sides or Swift or Objective-C libraries?
It's a good question actually, and it's one which I think probably is going to end up making its way onto the roadmap. It's something I really want to have happen. Now, whether it's a case of Apigility doing that, or whether it's a case of actually partnering up a product that's already out there, or something, a project that's underway, I like the idea of having something that's really nice and easy to reuse. We sort of been dabbling with a few things ourselves, that will make application development a bit faster, and particularly the API stuff. We've been favouring Angular for the front end, so I think that something that was going to make it really nice and easy to play. I think what would be particularly good, where Apigility's strength will be, is if it was able to do something with the front end which would actually leverage HAL, the HAL specification. So I think things that would make it easy for someone to have a very simple CRUD interface to work with it, just so you've got something that's rapidly generated, and then you can do the typical sort of bootstrap thing to some extent, where you would override various things with your own pepper and salt, as it were. Anyway, not yet that I'm aware of. If anybody knows of anything, definitely shout out. So we're basically looking for something that would rapidly generate a front end that would be compatible with, if you gave it an example of an entity in JSON or something like that, so it would allow you to do sort of simple CRUD requests or something. Anybody know about anything like that? Okay, if anybody's got any thoughts, then definitely pop something into the comment and go from there. Realising I'm gas bagging here quite a lot, I'm very excited. I've had a lot of coffee today, so I might just hand over to... Okay. So from that point of view, folks, we usually like to take a... Sorry? Chrome's fine? Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's probably a good idea to just check if anybody does have any projects that they're looking for people to help out and volunteer on. If there's anybody who's looking to try and get somebody involved to actually help them commercially, anything like that. We really just wanted to take an opportunity to... Yes, absolutely. So just take a moment. Anybody in that situation, either looking for a collaborator, looking for someone to join a team, anything like that? Anybody Show of hands if you do. Ollie? Okay, cool. So I think we're going to try something different this time around. We've actually got a timer this time, is that right?
Oh, yes.
And I said that because I saw Ollie coming up here. Next thing you know, it'll all be about his magic talking socks.
Okay, I won't lie. My socks don't talk this time. They're just normal. No, seriously. Why we're plugging? We're actually looking for a QA engineer with automation experience. So, if any of you like the idea of that, or probably know someone, it's more likely, that has automation experience, preferably around BHAT, PHP unit, all the usual stuff. Yeah, we're looking for someone. So, we being the iconic.com.au. So, give me a shout if you are or you know anyone, and there may be a reward in it for you. Way.
Oh, I'm done.
There we go. I didn't turn you off, say. Well, anyway, I don't think so. Anyway, it's probably the beard. All right. Okay. So, anybody else? Any other projects that you want to tell people about? Maybe share some ideas or look. Yeah. No. Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, then I'll let you do that then, sir. That'd be nice too. Yes.
So we've got some lucky door prizes tonight, courtesy of Canva, and I've got Cliff up here once we get this. Oh, it's all full screen already. I'll hand over to Cliff.
G'day everyone, we've got a company called Canva. I'm not sure if any of you guys have heard of it, but we started doing some PHP. We're developing a WordPress plugin at the moment, which has been in absolutely massive demand from all our users to integrate in with their blogs. One of our primary the type of people that use Canva are bloggers, marketers, but the bloggers have been screaming out for a WordPress plugin for ages. That's been doing a fair bit of work on the WordPress plugin, but it's about time I think we bring in a PHP pro, someone that can actually run with the project, do a couple of weeks work on it and maintain it on an ongoing basis. So what we thought we'd do, we'd give you a quick demo of the plugin. And my details are down there. It's cliff@canva.com. And sounds like this microphone just came on. Okay. Yeah, so we'll give you a quick demo. And if you're interested in working with Canva, shout out. It's cliff@canva.com. And yeah, we can be in touch and have a chat.
Hey guys, how you doing? So I'm just logging into our WordPress blog here. I will say no. Right, so the idea, if I create a post in a WordPress, we have our Canva button, which basically lets you design something in Canva and have it automatically posted into your blog. So it's this button here. And I'm to log into this as well. Just create a password. Now sign up's done. Go again.
I apologise for my internet in advance. I best not.
Right, anyway, so when it loads, you go into Canva, you can design graphics. When you export them, here we go. Skip that. So if I add text or images, whatever, sort of stuff like that to a design, maybe a background image, so on, I can publish it. downloads and images pasted into the blog in this way. So there's some other work we've been doing on it to improve it around being able to go back in, edit designs, and do other things, manage media and so on. So there's a bunch of work that we need to do to improve it to get some more features in there. So really someone who knows their way around WordPress really well and who wants to cut some PHP, get some better practices around testing and so on. So that's what we're after. If anyone is keen to do that, we need someone to take ownership of that. That's it. Thank you.
Alrighty, so we've got a couple of JB Hi-Fi gift vouchers to give away, courtesy of Canva, and we've got a cool little tool here built by one of the guys that organises the Melbourne PHP meetup. Ben put this together, and so hopefully it works. It's not my fault if it breaks. Tweet Ben. But this is just drawing from the meetup group, so if you've RSVP'd, lucky door prize. There we go, my URL shortener didn't work.
Bit too short.
Bit too short, yeah. Bit like me.
Stop aligning yourself, Jack.
Sorry, I can't hear you from down here. And as the internet loads, actually, while we're waiting, does anyone want to tweet Ben about the speed of his website? Dave, do you want to get down to that one? Fingers crossed this works.
We may have more luck if we just shout Jeff.
There we go. Cyril here.
Cyril.
Hey.
Cyril.
Don't spend it all at once.
That's not serial.
Oh,
you're not serial. There you go, you deserve it anyway, mate.
Best Cyril impression I've ever seen. That is awesome.
Anil.
Hey. We need some ideas, there, Anil.
There you go, good man.
And third lucky door prize, Joseph here. Yes. Alrighty, so we've got two more of those to give away at the end of the night, so hang around, we'll give two more away. And there's also a slightly bigger prize for any lightning talks. The best lightning talk tonight will get a...
Once more, Rick.
Once more. Best lightning talk tonight will also get a slightly larger prize giveaway, thanks to the guys at Canva. So if anyone wants to do a lightning talk tonight on any topic, we've got a nice large countdown timer to put a bit of pressure on you. And if you have a chat to Dave while I'm up here, we'll see what we can get going. Brilliant. So if you give me probably 5 minutes to get it set up for the next talk, we've got a chance to get a beer, and we'll put back in 5. Thanks.